Hey, how's it going? Jim Alfano here at the Brooke team at eXp Realty. I hope you're very well. So I'm bringing to you my buyer's consultation. The goal of this video is to show you the process of purchasing real estate in the state of Connecticut. And when we purchase real estate in the state of Connecticut, we're presenting our offers on the actual purchase contract. So I'm going to break down the purchase contract in different sections and give a brief overview explanation of each, and also give you a visual of the actual words in the purchase contract. And then we're going to take a brief intermission, and then we're going to get back to it. And I'm going to talk about some strategies that we could use to benefit your offer and make it appear as good as it possibly can in relationship to the other offers that may be presented to sellers. So let's rock and roll. Let's go check it out and let's make this happen. Section 1 here is real simple. It's just identifying the buyers and sellers related to this purchase contract. And section 2 is also just as simple. It's identifying the subject property, the property that you are potentially looking to purchase. Fixtures and personal property. This section is going to discuss the expectation that items that are affixed to the real estate are expected to transfer with the sale of the real estate. For example, one of my best and most favorite analogies is the kitchen sink. If I was to go to Home Depot, buy a kitchen sink and, simply place it in the box on the living room floor and it's not connected to anything, at that point, it's still personal property. But the moment I take that sink and I install it in the kitchen and I plumb it to the home, now it's a fixture. So quite often, sellers will present to you an inclusion-exclusion list if they want to keep a certain item in the house that otherwise would be expected to transfer with the real estate. If they want to keep it, let's say they have a great-grandmother's chandelier in the entranceway, it's an absolutely beautiful chandelier, they could exclude that from the sale of the property. All right, here, section 4 is the meat and potatoes of this purchase contract. It is talking about the dollars and the cents of it. So on the top, we have the actual purchase price being offered, right? And that's pretty self-explanatory. It's what you're offering by the house. Now we're going to get into some more of the details of this offer. So, hey, 4A is the earnest money deposit. This is an amount of money that you are putting on deposit to purchase the property. It is typically given within 3 days to either the seller's attorney or their brokerage and held in an escrow account, which is non-interest bearing. And then that will be used toward the closing or given back to the buyer if the buyer has to back out of the deal because of one of the contingencies, which I'll discuss going forward. But the earnest money deposit and the point of it is so that we could show the sellers, hey, look, we're really committed to buying this property. And we're going to offer you a good, solid amount for the earnest money deposit. Now, if you make an earnest money deposit that's very small, the sellers are going to look at that and say, they're not really that committed to purchasing this home. And sellers want to know that when they enter into the purchase agreement with you, that you're committed to seeing it through the end. The last thing a seller wants and the agent on the other side is to get into a purchase agreement and to have it fall apart toward the end. So everyone is looking for commitment toward closing on the deal. Now, 4B is very simple. If you want to split your earnest money deposit into 2 payments, you can do it here. So section 4C is an interesting one. It's not often utilized, but the feasibility is that a buyer can assume the existing mortgage on the property from the seller. So that's an interesting concept. And obviously the seller would have to have an awesome interest rate and the details of that would have to be worked out. But that is an option that exists. Now, 4D is talking about the mortgage, what the lender is going to be contributing toward the purchase, what they're going to be loaning the buyer. That's what 4D is, not including the down payment. All right, so 4F is going to total up everything we've talked about thus far. Most often, it's going to equal the purchase price that we are offering. Sometimes you may put a really strong earnest money deposit and your down payment may not be so high. So it's potentially a situation where the total is more than actually what you're going to offer on the property, and then you would just get some money back at closing that you could use to the closing costs as well. Section 5 is the mortgage contingency, and I'm going to take a moment here to talk about contingencies in that word. So there are 2 main contingencies in the purchase contract, the inspection and the mortgage contingency, and they're going to outline some parameters that if those parameters are not met, with like speaking specifically to this mortgage contingency, it allows the buyer to get out of the contract legally without breaking the contract. Therefore, they get the earnest money deposit back. You would get your earnest money back in that situation, but you have to exit the contract in a legitimate manner. You can't just, get the offer accepted, get under contract, and then a week later, we change our mind. You're going to lose your deposit if you do that. But we do have the mortgage contingency here. We would specify how long until we get the mortgage commitment. We would specify a maximum interest rate because, you never know what happens in the world. And if the rates go to 15% tomorrow, that would become unaffordable for you, and you'd want an opportunity to back out of the purchase agreement. Okay, so that's why that exists. And also you could define the terms, the amount of years, so on and so forth, and if you're putting any points down. That's where this is all laid out. Section 6 here is talking about the number we put in 4A, which is your earnest money deposit. 7 is going to talk about the closing date. Most often I will put a mark at about 45 days for closing. And that's something, it's like a target date. It's not an exact date. Ultimately, the attorneys for the buyers and the sellers will communicate with each other and be the final authority about the exact closing date. It is up to them, and they will communicate with you. Your attorney will communicate with you and me, and that'll be solidified and known. Section 8 talks about possession at closing and the condition of the property at closing too. Okay. So there's a number of times you're going to see this property. The first time is going to be the first initial showing. Now we may have a second showing. We'll probably also have an inspection because I always highly recommend an inspection, right? And then typically you don't see the property again until the final walkthrough. Now, most often the final walkthrough will commence the morning of the closing. And the expectation is that the property will be in the condition that you saw it on the first showing, the second showing, the inspection, so that when you go through that final walkthrough, the grass isn't 15 feet high, the snow is not unshoveled, or the house didn't get flooded or something severe. That's why we do the final walkthrough right before the closing. We have to make sure the property is as expected. Section 9 is simply a place where we could put other conditions to this purchase contract. And most often, a lot of the other strategies that can be utilized in the offering purchase of property will be put in here. And I'll talk about those strategies and conditions a little bit later. Section 10 talks about the title. It is the expectation, and your attorney will do the title search, that the title is free and clear from any encumbrances. In other words, that there is no tax liens, mechanic liens, or disputes about who owns the property on the title. You have to get a free and clear title, and this outlines that. Now, the adjustments section is talking about things like property tax. So, for example, right, you have property taxes that are paid on the property. Usually at the beginning of the year, someone's going to pay property tax. It's relevant for that entire year. Now, let's say you're buying on July 1st. Okay, the sellers paid property taxes for 12 months. You're closing on July 1, and there are 6 months of property taxes that were already paid by the seller. So you're going to have to pay and reimburse the seller for those property taxes. Same thing like if you have a house that's got an oil tank and there's $400 worth of fuel in that oil tank, you have to buy that at a fair rate from the seller, and the attorney will help us negotiate that. So Section 12 is going to talk about the damages and remedies if someone backs out of the contract illegally. So like I said, the contingencies are legitimate reasons to back out. You would get your earnest money deposit back. But as I said earlier, you can't just simply 4 days later change your mind on a fully executed contract and say, I changed my mind, I want my money back. You're not going to get your money back that easily. Okay, and this section is going to explain that, right? Also, the seller is obligated to sell you the property, and there could be damages against the seller. But it's a situation where if the seller changes their mind, which is very uncommon but can happen, it's going to be difficult and maybe not cost effective to pursue it and try to force them to selling. It may sound a little bit unfair, but when you're in that situation, you think about the attorney fees and the whole process. Hopefully we don't have to cross that bridge, but then I'll help you cross it if we ever were to get to that point. Section 13 is going to discuss how this contract is the complete agreement. So If you guys had another purchase agreement for a lower price point, and then you negotiate and you change it and you sign a different price point higher or whatnot, this is the new agreement. It's executed and it's the complete agreement. It takes precedence over any other agreements. Assignability, not common, but possible. If both parties agree, the buyer and the seller, a buyer can get under contract to purchase property and then feasibly decide to assign it to their brother, relative, friend, or whomever, if the seller agrees and the buyer agrees that assignment can happen and that other person can purchase. A sole survival is simply an indication that one of the parties is deceased. Their heirs are supposed to honor this purchase agreement. For example, if the sellers are deceased and the heirs inherit the property, those heirs are supposed to continue through to the closing and sell the property as outlined in this purchase agreement. Section 16 is about equal housing rights. As a realtor, we have an ethical and honorable obligation to not steer anyone in a certain area and show anything that the buyer can afford. And 100%, I wouldn't dream of doing anything aside from that. Okay, so section 17 is the inspection contingency section. This is where we're going to outline the details of the inspections that are going to be conducted, the timeline, which ones we're going to do. Okay. I always recommend inspections. You're going to want to do the structure of the house, the pests, the insects. If the house has a well system, it has to be inspected. If it has a septic system, that has to be inspected. The heating and air conditioning, the inspectors are going to look at everything. And also there's something called radon, where it could come from the ground, from the earth into the basement, and radon is poisonous and causes cancer. So we definitely want to do a radon test, and you're going to test the well for not only the functionality of the well system, but the quality of the water. You want to make sure there's no radon in the water or other bacteria or other items in the water that you don't want to have your family drink. So it's a critically important thing. Whether or not we go back and negotiate based upon these findings is another thing that we address individually with each situation. But if you find something in the inspection that's really bad, this is the section that allows you to get out of the purchase contract and get your money back, get the earnest money back. It's a legitimate contingency. And you don't have to go into great detail with the sellers as to why you're getting out. You could just simply say, hey, we inspected the property and we are not comfortable with the condition, we are out. There are a number of strategies that we can implement and leverage to our advantage to help us look better against the competition. And here in this section, section 18, is where we could check the boxes off to indicate which riders are going to be attached to this purchase contract. I'll discuss them a little bit later. Section 19A is talking about the property condition disclosure. Okay. The sellers are obligated to fill out this document, which is going to have them sign and say that to the best of their knowledge, this is the truth. And it's going to go over details about the property condition. There are cases where that may not be an obligation to fill out. Let's say it's an heir that never lived in the property. Well, they can't be expected to fill that out properly. But, if a seller is owning the property, has lived in there, they have to fill this out and present it to you. And if they don't, they have to put $500 toward the closing to give to you. Okay. So they're penalized if they don't fill out the form. So most times we will get the form. 19B is related to the smoke and carbon monoxide detectors by code and regulations that are supposed to be in the home. If the sellers don't have these in place, they either have to put them in place or they have to give you a $250 credit at closing. Section 20 is to alert you to the fact that there are rules and regulations that require a list of hazardous waste sites be kept at the town's offices and that you have access to these lists. So this is important because obviously you don't want to wind up buying a house that's next to the town dump or transfer station. Section 21 is just a section where we can both parties, buyers and sellers, agree to sign documents electronically. Section 22 is simply going to outline the real estate brokerages that are involved with this transaction. Hey, this is a lot of information, and I just wanted to put a little intermission here, a little comedic break, looking at that garden gnome, the rake, and the lady saying, I'm out. So let's get ready to move on to some of the strategies that we could use to make your offer stronger when you find the home that you really want to buy. So the jump clause is one of my favorite strategies to implement when it's appropriate. So if we see a home that's new to the market and attractive, we think there's a lot of interest in it. And I look at the showings, the showing schedule, and we could see a lot of activity. And maybe there's an open house coming on the weekend. We could utilize the jump clause to potentially get ahead of the line, kind of skip the line, so to speak. So in this example, we're increasing our purchase price to $400,000. So let's say the house is listed at $375,000. What we could do is implement an offer of $375,000 with the jump clause to $400,000 if our offer is accepted by a certain time. So this gets us ahead of some of the competition potentially. It gets us ahead of the open houses, so on and so forth, and can be very motivational because, the sellers have to think, wow, this is $25,000 over asking. Do we take the chance of losing this and hope to get a better offer from these other people? Or do we jump on this and just accept it? So I've used it successfully, and I'm a fan of the jump clause. Hey, the escalation clause could be another very useful tool when it's appropriate again. So we can be in a situation with a house listed for $250,000, and we either know of other offers or expect that the property will get other offers, right? And, I'm going to always, when you say that you're interested in purchasing a property, I'm going to pull comps and do a market analysis for you and really establish market value. And you may decide to offer above market value, or maybe the market value is higher than what it's listed. So your maximum that you're willing to spend on that $250,000 list price may be $281,000 for your offer, which is obviously over asking. But what we could do is we could start at $250,000, put the offer at $250,000 with an escalation clause stating that we're going to beat any other offer by $2,000 up to a maximum of $281,000. And they have to present to you evidence of the other offers. So hypothetically, in this situation, if there's another offer at $270,000 and they show us here, look at this other offer at $270,000, then we're at $272,000. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions, but that's a great one to utilize. Sometimes there may be a situation where, given the current market, given the current inventory, and given how you may feel about a home, you may be willing to step up to the plate and spend more than the house might be worth at that moment. Now, if you're going to be in the house for a long period of time, you'll get your equity back, right? So sometimes it may make sense for you to do that. And I will always give you data to enable you to make your own decision. But when something is either listed too high, or maybe the appraiser is incorrect, or anything of that sort. But the bank always, if you're getting a mortgage, you're going to send their own appraiser in to do an appraisal. And sometimes that appraisal may fall short of the agreed upon purchase price. So what the low appraisal gap rider is going to state is that we are willing to put in another $5,000 in cash if the appraisal comes in $5,000 low. Okay? So if the appraisal comes in $2,000 low, you're going to put in $2,000. If it comes in $10,000 low, we can renegotiate, but you're not, putting in an obligation, a rider that's stating you're going to pay $10,000. This one is $5,000. So we would discuss that. And this is another way to strengthen your offer and make this offer look better in comparison to the competition. I want to talk about this inspection threshold, but I want to preface it with some things. Oftentimes, you're going to see properties listed in as is. They'll say sold as is. It doesn't necessarily speak to the condition of the house. It does speak to the fact that the seller does not want to be nickeled and dimed or negotiate about anything. They're just saying, this is the house, take it as it is. It could be in great condition, it could be in terrible condition. It's not an indication of the condition. It is an indication that the seller is unwilling to address any of the issues and is selling it just the way it is. Okay. Now, a lot of times when we do an inspection contingency, as I always recommend doing an inspection, we can offer, whether or not the property is listed to be sold as is, we can offer as is with inspections. And what that's going to tell the sellers is, hey, look, sellers, we're not going to, we're accepting a house as it is. We're not going to come in and ask you to fix the doorknob or the loose board on the deck. But we still want to do an inspection for our information and for the ability to walk away from the property if we find something very, very significantly wrong. So that's an as is with inspection. Another method is this inspection threshold, where we can tell the sellers, look, sellers, we're going to go into this And we know the reality is there's always going to be some little things that need to be addressed or fixed. Okay. And we as the buyers are going to come in and be willing to spend up to $5,000 to fix these minor issues. But if anything is above that, then, then we're going to negotiate or reserve the right to get out of the contract based upon the inspection contingency. So this is just the inspection threshold is just a way to explain that sentiment to the sellers. So the notice of termination and release of deposit is not something that we love to engage in, but when it's needed, it's needed. Okay. So if you need to get out of the deal because of inspection related issues, or because maybe something happened, maybe you got fired, or you got hurt and you lost your job and you can't get the mortgage anymore, which is why we have the mortgage contingency, one of the reasons. But for whatever reason, if you're legitimately getting out of the contract from one of the contingencies in the contract, okay, this is the document that we would have to present and explain why we're backing out. The Hubbard Clause in an ideal world wouldn't be needed, but in the real world, people have houses already often, and they need the money from that sale to get into their next home. So we have to be very strategic about that. And that's a big, long conversation that I will have. If you're in that situation, we'll go down that path and I'll explain it to you. But a lot of it is preparation and explaining to the sellers how well we are prepared to sell the house. Okay. And the things that we're doing to get it sold expeditiously. Okay. That's all very, very important. But this is the document that's going to explain that. It's going to outline, we're going to look at the data to see the median days on market in your price point in your town and come up with a very strong strategy to get your home sold. And then we're going to add a little bit more time into this and come up with the timeline that we're going to put in this. If the sellers happen to find another offer that comes in that they want to accept, then they can accept that offer, but they do have to give you a chance. And that's where we are giving here in this example, 3 days. So we would have 3 days to commit to the process and get it done. Okay. It's not ideal. It would be in a utopian world. No one would have Hubbard clauses, but in a real world, they're often necessary. So this is how we navigate that. All right. So we made it to the end. Congratulations. Thank you for hanging with me through this video buyer's consultation. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your attention to this because it's going to help us 100%. Your knowledge, you're gaining knowledge about this, and me educating you about this process is very helpful. So in closing, I just want to go over a couple of things. In order to legally show properties in the state of Connecticut, you and I have to have a right to represent agreement with you. And what I do for folks is, I make it simple. If we don't know each other, maybe I'll do it for that one property, maybe for the one day. And as we get to know each other, if we need more time, we'll navigate that. We're going to look at properties, and when you find the one you want, we're going to make an offer. The offer is going to go on the purchase contract we saw, okay? And then we're going to do the earnest money deposit. We're going to get through the inspection period. We're going to get once we pass that, we're going to go through the mortgage contingency period, where the underwriters give you the thumbs up and clear to close. And then we get to the closing table, do the final walkthrough, and close on your brand new property, which I can't wait to help you get. So let me know if there's any questions. I know some of this stuff is very fast, and I'm more than happy to go into any level of detail that you want. Talk over these points again in person or on the phone. Answer any questions in any matter, text or email or otherwise. Just shoot me a message or a text or a phone call, 203-408-1693. Again, 203-408-1693. My email is jim@Brooke with an E at the end, jim@BrookeGroupRealEstate.com. Awesome. Thank you again, guys. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.